Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today I'm finally going to be talking about the newest album from Alice Wallace called Into the Blue. So I've said a number of times before that one of the biggest problems with indie country is how it can really struggle to get the word out surrounding new acts. Internet-driven groundswell has started to take a little more shape in the 2010s, finally, but it has been scattered at best, and too often I find myself going back to dig up acts where if they hadn't slipped below the radar, I probably would have given them a ton of critical acclaim. They were that good just below the radar. And Alice Wallace is a pretty striking example of this. A California-based singer-songwriter, she's been putting out albums since the beginning of the 2010s with a pretty damn striking voice and a fondness for yodeling, but what really captured my interest was her 2015 album Memories, Music, and Pride, where the songwriting took a measurable step up along with production that picked up a lot more detail and refinement and muscle. And it's really tough to nail down an easy comparison for her sound, even in indie country. A little bit more stately and neo-traditional than Karen Jonas's gritty early material, but not quite as inclined towards pop as Caitlin Smith or as cutesy as Casey Musgraves. As observational as someone like Brandy Clark, along with a similar vocal timbre, but not quite as wise just yet. But hey, some of that comes with time, and Memories, Music, and Pride probably deserved a solid review back in 2015. I only heard it recently and it's a great album, so you can bet I was curious about her follow-up this year with Into the Blue. So what did we get? Well, honestly, it's hard for me to just not go through Into the Blue and call it just as good as the last album, if not even a little better. And the strange thing with this is that Into the Blue is that it still reflects a remarkable amount of versatility and potential that Alice Wallace has going forward, still being carried on a terrific voice and tone that pulls from other lanes to refine her sound, all without being derivative of what can be seen as a pretty cluttered indie country scene right now. Maybe it's that distance and being in California that keeps her away from trend-riding timbres, but it is absolutely working for her and definitely deserves a lot of attention. I know I'm a little bit late to the party with this album, but I'm so happy I get to talk about it. But let me start off with the criticisms I do have for it, most of which feel pretty minor, all things considered, but are relevant all the same, especially when it comes to the larger questions of why Alice Wallace hasn't quite broken through yet. And for me, it seems to come down to how it might be difficult to pin down her distinctive lane, which some have followed up with the assertion is that when she dabbles in different territory outside of what might be her lane, the songs just aren't quite strong enough in order to stand out. And indeed, if I'm going to compare cuts like the country soul fusion of the same old song with many of the indie acts in that lane, and there's a lot of them, or the Spanish guitar and smoky Latin vibe of Desert Rose to, say, a Lindy Ortega or Hooray for the Riff Raff song, I can see how Alice Wallace and her producers don't quite have the same command of the texture she might need to really make it great. She absolutely has the clear pipes and the control and the poise, but you could definitely question whether she needed a little bit more to differentiate those songs from what we're familiar with in that genre. Good songs, for sure, but they don't quite stand out as much as they really could without a little bit more bite or sizzle. And that's the other thing. For as burnished and warm and melodic and layered as so many of these songs are, you could make the argument they lack a certain bite or snarl to add more immediacy or really grab the listener. They're rounded, they're smooth, they go down a bit easier, which definitely reflects refinement, but there are some topics here that could afford to be a little bit more brittle or distorted or dangerous, like on The Lonely Talkin' or the gentler folk country touches up top of the world. Hell, I'd even say Echo Canyon is kinda close to that territory too, even despite its peeling pedal steel or the darker warping smolder, although her yodeling does do a great job pulling it all together. But on that topic, I do understand why there might be a little less yodeling here, but she does it so well, I was almost looking for more. But keep in mind, a lot of this is production nitpicking from somebody who is convinced that Alice Wallace could bring that slightly more raw edge as a singer while still sounding refined or bringing the necessary subtlety when she needs it. And hell, if you're looking for a reason to check out this album on talent alone, it comes with Alice Wallace and her vocals. Just the bell-to-gun when she cries, bringing in a burly muscle shoal sound is absolutely fantastic, especially with the full commitment to the richer horns and the strings. But then when you pair it with the subtle heartbreak of the acoustic elephants, or the wistfulness of Motorcycle Ride, or the beautifully multi-tracked hook of The Blue, you know that Wallace's voice is your strongest asset on this album. And yet not only is she given the right space, she's given richer instrumental melodies and those harmonies to complement those vocals. The low-end gallop and the flutes and the bass on Santa Ana Winds that leans into some of the Latin influences and does it well. The twinkling touches from the keyboards on Motorcycle Ride, and then the strings layering on Into the Blue. It sounds fantastic. Hell, for as lush as this album can feel, the easiest comparison might be Caitlin Smith's Starfire from last year, but Alice Wallace is more controlled, and this project is a lot more even, and defiantly country to boot, because even the songs that step towards soul or blues or touches of mariachi, they're still grounded in a neo-traditional country tone, showing that in any decade of the past 40 years, this album could have been released and could have done well. But those are the common elements of praise that a lot of critics have already mentioned. If I want to highlight where Alice Wallace deserves a lot more acclaim, or may even be underrated, it comes in her songwriting. And while I've always appreciated the folk tendencies and fleshing out the detail in her lyrical cadence, the added steps to nuance and storytelling do a lot of heavy lifting surrounding the central themes of this album, most of which are focused on the women in Wallace's story stepping out of their comfort zones against both internal doubts and a very dangerous external world, sometimes forced out because of necessity, sometimes of their own volition. And while the song Elephants has gotten the most immediate credit, a song that sharply casts not only the real fear that women can face in refusing men and not calling out their bullshit and abuse, but also in the fragile ego and insecurities of guys that lies at the roots of so much of it, and the almost sympathetic form that Alice Wallace takes to the song adds a lot of nuance. But even with that, thematically, this album is varied but still remarkably consistent. Desert Rose tells the story of a desperate Mexican woman making a run for the US border, and sadly feels missing a few more teeth in telling what might have happened should she arrive seeking asylum in the modern era. Just a missed opportunity there. Echo Canyon has her thrown from her horse after a dark ride facing the frigid wild night ahead. Santa Ana Winds has her fleeing the fires raging across Southern California, and The Lonely Talkin' has her trying to apologize for her drunken storm out in the face of insecurities that she personifies in the song. But what's most potent about this album is how so much of the women of these stories, they're at least trying to claim some of that complicated narrative of their own, take agency, and the exhilaration of taking that control gives songs like The Blue and Motorcycle Ride a journeywoman's touch and momentum that makes them really compelling. Hell, that probably underscores the closing track the most, For Califia, where it seems like the wildness has been tamed and then the history rewritten to say that the Queen of California was willing to settle down, but you can't bury that spirit. And even by planting the seeds in the wind, some of that drive and truth of that time and era and place, it can be reclaimed, and for the better. But as a whole, yeah, this was an excellent album, and I was late to the party covering it properly, but let's correct the record by saying that if you're looking for another strong indie talent in country right now, Alice Wallace is delivering in spades. And I speak to the larger backers here as well. She's got the tone and pipes to play to a much larger audience that I reckon she probably deserves. And as such, oh yeah, solid 8 out of 10, absolutely recommended, and definitely worth keeping your eyes open going forward. Alice Wallace, she's only getting better, I can see her going places, definitely worth a lot more attention. Check her out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, I know I'm nearly a month late to this, but yeah, you're gonna want to hear it. It is some great indie country. I'm so happy I caught it. Beyond that, if you want to buy or stream the album, highly recommend you do. Links down there below. And I got the poll up there. I'm curious for the few people who actually heard this, what you think about it. Just go off that. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And hey, if you want to support the channel, link to my Patreon right over there. I'm still trying to rework things over there, but we'll see what happens. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.